Hello, everyone, and welcome to my pleasure dome. We are in the poetry corner of this particular dome. I am Balkwell, and today we are discussing Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, which, which is actually the source of my very famous YouTube introduction. Now, Samuel Taylor Coleridge was an English poet around the late 18th, early 19th century, and he was sort of a precursor to the Romantic poets that would come a little bit later, such as Percy Shelley, John Keats, Lord Byron, etc. In his time, he was a bit of a black sheep among the sort of poetry establishment, if such a thing can be said to exist. He was a very passionate individual, and also a very philosophical one. He was interested in German metaphysics and the literary ideas, theories of Friedrich Schiller, for example. And he would often confuse people greatly by talking at great length about these topics. He was somewhat of a tormented soul, as passionate people often are, and for much of his life he was addicted to opium, which only contributed more to these sort of ups and downs that characterize his life. But we will get into some more of that as we go through the poem itself. The idea for this video is we're going to go through the poem, not necessarily line by line, but bit by bit, partially in an attempt to describe what is actually being depicted within the poem, because it can be a little bit confusing. The subject will shift abruptly from time to time, and obviously, being a 200-year-old poem, there's a bit of a language barrier at times, not a huge one, but a little bit. And along the way, I will provide some interpretive notes as to what Coleridge is getting at. What can we derive from this poem as we read it once we understand what is going on? To begin with, who is Kubla Khan and what is Xanadu? These are the two proper nouns that we will find in the first line of the poem. Kubla Khan was the Mongol emperor of China in the, I believe, late 13th century, and he basically, I don't know if he conquered China. China was conquered, and he became the emperor, set up his sort of base of operations in Chengdu, which Marco Polo very kindly transliterated as Xanadu, which we must. He did us a great favor because that is a very cool and interesting name. Now, Kubla Khan comes with a sort of introductory preface written by the poet himself, in which he describes the composition of this poem. We can't take this preface too literally. Documentary research has proven that it's very unlikely that this is the case. Not that that really matters at all. But we can sort of interpret it as a sort of metafictional preface if we wish. So the basic idea is that Coleridge, who was living at the top of a barn, I believe, at the time, or staying there, not necessarily living there, he had a dream. He was reading a book about Marco Polo's adventures and about Kubla Khan and the pleasure dome he decreed in Chengdu, or Xanadu. And while he was reading this, he fell asleep. And he had a dream. And within this dream, he composed this poem, supposedly. All the lines sort of came to him instantaneously, and when he woke up, he began to sort of transcribe this poem that had appeared to him. As he was doing so, he was interrupted by a visitor from Porlock, and this unfortunate man distracted Coleridge during this work. They sort of sat down and discussed whatever people from Porlock are interested in discussing. By the time they were done, Coleridge sat down again at his writing desk and realized he'd forgotten everything and could no longer finish the poem. So this presents the poem of Kubla Khan as something of an unfinished fragment. When we actually read the poem itself, I don't really get the sense that this is much of a fragment or that there's much further to go. The poem ends quite conclusively, though this could have been a later edition if we believe the preface, but it feels very coherent in a way that a fragment might not. However, Coleridge, he did often publish fragments or things he described as fragments, and he did often claim that there were further uh, claim that there was more to come, when in reality there wasn't really much of a plan for anything further to come. He just kind of stopped writing it, but didn't want to say it was finished. So my interpretation is something more like that, where he started this, maybe wasn't fully confident in what he was doing, or maybe felt like there was more he could have done, and decided to tell the story of the fragment. Though, as we will get into later, I believe there is a certain truth uh, to this story. Uh, we'll get into that later. For now, let's just get into the poem itself. I'll be reading through 4 or 5 lines at a time and then stopping to discuss. So the poem begins. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So, immediately we have a sort of otherworldly and exotic intro. Obviously, we're in the Far East. We have Kubla Khan, a sort of ancient figure, not super ancient, but pretty ancient, and he's in Xanadu. This, it's a when a name starts with an X, you're somewhere, kind of crazy. We have this sacred river Alph, which has not really any basis in reality with the real Xanadu, but we have this sacred river Alph. We have caverns measureless to man. No one knows, how deep they are or what have you. And we have this sunless sea. What makes the sea sunless? I guess it could be underground or something like this. This sort of weird, it's a weird image, right, of this sunless sea. And basically, these 5 lines introduce the setting that will be extrapolated much further in the second stanza of the poem. But for now, we have this pleasure dome that has been decreed by Kubla Khan. So what happens next? We got to build the thing. So we continue in the poem. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round. So we've, surrounded the place with walls and such to make our pleasure dome. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So here we have this sort of Edenic, paradisical imagery. We have gardens with sinuous rills, incense-bearing tree. Incense always implies a sort of richness, of luxuriousness to the thing. Forests ancient as the hills. Once again, we're ancient, we're sacred, we're otherworldly words here. Sunny spots of greenery. That's just very nice. We like to have greenery and the sun. So that's the first stanza. So we've set up. We have this pleasure dome. It's really nice, and it's in Xanadu, which is cool. So the second stanza begins. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedern cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted, as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. So what is going on here? We start, but oh, we have an exclamation, right? So something is shifting, something is changing. There's excitement in the air, I suppose. A deep romantic chasm. Interesting idea. The chasm is romantic. Obviously, we're not really talking in the modern sense of it, a nice place to take your date. A romantic chasm, I suppose, invokes something of the sublime. Look down this cavern. Obviously, this is the cavern measureless to man. So you look down and it's just huge, and you're just blown away by the majesty of it all. It's a savage place, holy and enchanted. as air beneath the waning moon was haunted, etc. So obviously, these last two lines here are a simile. Xanadu doesn't literally contain a woman wailing or a demon lover. He's saying that this place is as holy and as enchanted as any other place where a woman has wailed beneath a waning moon for her demon lover, of which I'm sure we can all name many. An interesting word choice here to describe it as holy and enchanted when this woman is haunted, or it's haunted by a woman wailing for her demon lover, which doesn't sound particularly holy. So maybe that's ironic, I guess. Anyway, it's a savage place, holy and enchanted, etc., etc. Continuing on. And from this chasm with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift and half-intermitted burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks, at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river. So here we have this chasm. I love the words here, ceaseless turmoil seething. That's just great alliteration there. And then in this next line, this earth in fast thick pants were breathing. The words themselves, the rhythm of the words express what is being described. You must make fast thick pants to say all these monosyllabic words. So that's very interesting. A mighty fountain momently was forced. Momently just means instantly or suddenly. So we have this fountain bursting through the earth here, right? Huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail. So these are huge fragments of earth and rocks flying out alongside this fountain. Chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. I actually find this kind of a weird simile here with the chaffy grain, just because everything else in the poem is so not abstract, so fantastical, so otherworldly, and then we're talking about grain beneath the thresher's flail. Maybe this image is more evocative to people who have seen grain being threshed. I don't really have much of context for that, so it just feels a bit odd. Mid these dancing rocks, flung up momently the sacred river. Once again, momently, instantly, this sacred river is bursting forth from this fountain, which is its source. So you'll notice there's a very sort of, a lot of violence and tumult, as a word we'll see later, violence to this eruption of this sacred river. Keep that in mind. So then we have the next bit. This is my favorite line coming up. 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion. Through wood and dale the sacred river ran. It reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. So it's 5 miles meandering. So this river is sort of meandering down the hills, as rivers are wont to do, past the wood and dale from before, the sacred river. Then it reaches the caverns measureless to man, which we saw in that first part. So this is kind of a repetition. Reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. We can presume that this lifeless ocean is the same as the sunless sea from before. Now, if we try to literally imagine this, when I speculated before that this sunless sea might be underground, we'll see in the next bit that this can't possibly be the case. It's a lifeless ocean, it's a sunless sea, so there's something, there's a sort of a void there, right? It's this ocean that has nothing going on. Maybe there are slight ripples or waves. It's probably more like a lake, if we're being honest. But a lifeless ocean, there's no like ducks, hanging out or whatever. It's this very sort of tranquil, but in a sort of negative sense. And so within this tumult, all this violent noise, this chaos of this sacred river bursting from the earth, Kubla hears ancestral voices prophesying war. Now, this is actually the last we'll hear of Kubla Khan. He is mentioned precisely twice in the poem. Um, and so, what's going on here? So he's got this pleasure dome that he has created, this Edenic world, this paradise with its green hills and forests and etc. But there, within this place, or maybe right next to it, or I guess within with the sacred river, we have this violence, prophesying war, this threat, this promise of violence that Kubla Khan, who's of course a Mongol emperor and does lead invasions into Japan and Korea and I think Vietnam, etc. Anyway, military leader. He's set up this place that's supposed to be, joyous and paradise, but of course, it's built on violence, right? It's constructed on violence. He's a conqueror, and there's this juxtaposition and this contrast there that will be made even more clear in the following lines. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. I love that. Sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. Amazing. So, this shadow of the dome of pleasure. So, basically, what's happening here, the shadow of the pleasure dome, you can see it reflected, right? Or you could say the reflection on the waves of this lifeless ocean / sunless sea. So, clearly, there's a certain proximity here. That this lifeless ocean and this pleasure dome are not separated by vast distances. They're right next to each other. And when you're here viewing this shadow, the reflection, you can hear the fountain, you can hear the caves, the romantic chasm, the mighty fountain being momently forced, and the fragments of rebounding hail, and etc. So all this stuff is contained in the same place. It is part of the same thing, right? This sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice, obviously that's somewhat of a paradox. If it's sunny, how is there ice contained? Well, it's two sides of the same coin, right? We have this paradise and we have this torment, and they're not separated. They're interlinked very closely. The violence of the tumult of the fountain and the ancient hills, it's all part of one thing. It's all contained together. So that is the sort of central contrast of the poem and the imagery of Kubla Khan's pleasure dome. So then we begin the third stanza with a very abrupt shift, I think. Or it feels very abrupt when you're reading it the first time, and even the length of the lines change, and at first it feels like a bit of a non sequitur. However, it is not. So we continue. A damsel with a dulcimer, in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. A dulcimer is a sort of stringed instrument, like a lute or something like this. And Abyssinia is Ethiopia, so it's an Ethiopian maid. And she's playing on her dulcimer, and she's singing a song about Mount Abora. Now, what is Mount Abora? Well, Mount Abora doesn't exist. It's not real. It's like the sacred river Alf. However, we do have an earlier manuscript of the poem where he called it Mount Amara. And Mount Amara is real, and it is in Ethiopia or Abyssinia. And it actually has quite an interesting connection with the rest of the poem here, because Mount Amara is near the source of the Blue Nile. And the Blue Nile runs through Ethiopia and I believe Sudan. And in Ethiopian Christian tradition, this Blue Nile was connected to the river Gihon, which is described in chapter 2 of Genesis. And Gihon is said to flow through the land of Cush, which was the biblical name for this area of Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, etc. So we have this connection to Eden, right? The Mount Amara is sort of connected to Eden and paradise. Why he changed it from Amara to Abora later on, who the heck knows? I don't know. Maybe he just thought it sounded nicer. Maybe he wanted to get rid of that more literal connection and keep it more fantastical. No one knows, but it's an interesting connection to think about. Mount Abora, Mount Amara. Um, so he saw this woman in a vision, and she's singing her song about Mount Abora. Continue. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there. So what he's saying, if he could only recall, if he could only bring back this song that she sung, that he saw in a vision, he would be so pleased, so euphoric, that he would sing his own song. And he would build that dome in air, basically build it in an imaginary sense. And he would build the sunny dome, caves of ice, referring back to that. And all who heard should see them there. So basically, he's taking this vision he saw. If he could recall it correctly, he could build it in such a way that it is transmitted into the minds of the people who hear his song. And so what is Samuel Taylor Coleridge describing here is poetry. He's describing the composition of this very poem. And when you connect it with that preface of the dream, so he saw this Abyssinian maid in this dream he had, and he forgot it, when the guy from Porlock came by and wanted to talk about his stuff. But obviously he's saying, if only I could write a poem to communicate the imagery that I saw in this dream. Well, he's literally gone and done that. That's what this whole poem was. We read this. Now we have that in our brain. We have the pleasure zone. We have the caves of ice. We have the deep romantic chasm. It's all within our minds because he has transformed it into poetry. So we continue on. And all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey-dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. So he's building this stuff, and it's awesome, woohoo, but then we have this dark turn. The people they hear it, they can see it, and they say, beware, beware, this guy is nuts, flashing eyes, floating hair, like he's totally, experiencing some sort of vision or seizure or whatever the heck. There's sort of the implication, they believe him possessed by a demon. Weave a circle round him thrice. It's sort of a cleansing ritual. Close your eyes with holy dread. Don't let yourself see it directly, because he's fed on honeydew and it's etc. So this is sort of about the reception of his poetic inspiration, right? He sees this dream, this vision, he recounts it in poetry, and what happens? Everyone thinks he's crazy, he's been possessed. It's almost like what Plato says about how poetic inspiration is basically next to madness, or comparable to madness, or even the same thing as madness. That's what these people are seeing. They're seeing this inspiration in its very sort of classical sense as like something being, I believe inspiration is a similar root as respiration. So you're sort of imbibing this vision, this divine sense. They're seeing this and it looks totally crazy and wild, and they don't want anything to do with it, right? So this is sort of the nature of Coleridge's poetic inspiration. He receives these things, he makes these what he believes to be beautiful poems. He's expressing this divine inspiration he has been given, and it's not accepted. It's seen as something weird and divergent. However, there's another sense to it. I think that's my primary reading, that this inner paradise is contrasted with this external torment. That people, when they see him in this euphoric mode, they see it the opposite. However, I think there's also a reading we can make that has to do with Coleridge's relationship with opium. Now, when a man who is an opium addict says that he saw a dream and he wrote a poem about it, there's always going to be this question of whether it was just he fell asleep and had a nice little dream, or if it is something more akin to an opium vision. I think that I've never done opioids. My sense is that this does not really feel like a dream necessarily. It feels much more like a vision, much more like something you're sitting there, you're not quite asleep, but you're imagining it. And because of the help of drugs, you're able to imagine it in a very concrete way. You can feel it very strongly. And that's what this description of of Kubla Khan's pleasure dome feels like to me. So when you are a user of opium, you end up with certain physical characteristics that people can notice. So I believe that's what he's referring to with the flashing eyes, the floating hair, the sort of disheveled look that he might have, right? In his experience, in his inner experience of taking these drugs, he's experiencing euphoria. But to the rest of the world, it doesn't look very euphoric. It looks kind of like you're not having a very good time. But also there is this fundamental disconnect between what Coleridge is able to experience when he is on opium and how it makes reality feel. You know, he is able to experience this euphoria, visit this paradise, and then when he gets back to earth, to reality, it feels like sort of a torment, right? People are looking at him, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. So because he has had these experiences, because he has been on these visions and these journeys in his mind, it's changed him. He doesn't fit in with regular reality anymore. There's this disconnect. And I think that, in my interpretation, I think that is a factor here in this poem. He's drunk the milk of paradise now. He's sort of lost to the world. He's gone somewhere else. And there's always going to be this disconnect. I think it's not necessary to make this biographical, this opium-related interpretation. That's just something I think is interesting. I think viewing it as poetic inspiration is also a very interesting way of looking at it, and I don't think either one is fully the case, that it's, you know, some sort of mixture in between, and that's kind of how poetry works, right? You don't know exactly what you're conveying. There's a lot of things that are converging within you that then are expressed in the poem in various ambiguous ways. And so I think Kubla Khan, it's just such a beautiful poem. Just the imagery itself, the word choices, I think is just amazing. And it has this interesting contrast, this pleasure and torment that we can think about as well, this violence in paradise. So that has been Kubla Khan's Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan. If you'd like to know more about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, if this has piqued your interest, Richard Holmes, that's Holmes with an L, Holmes, wrote a 2-volume biography. I believe the second volume is called Darker Reflections. I don't remember the name of the first, but you'll find it. You know how to find it. I think he's a very interesting fellow. He's probably my favorite poet, if that means anything to anybody. For more, I've actually written about this poem in the past, and I made a YouTube video many moons ago talking about this poem in relation to Neil Young's song Cortez the Killer, if you can believe that. And also on my website, I wrote an essay about the Rush song Xanadu, which is very much inspired by this poem and even takes lines and images directly from it. For he hath fed on honeydew and drunk the milk of paradise, etc. So I wrote an essay talking about the different nuance of that song has when compared to the original poem. Why I keep writing things about comparing Kubla Khan with the songs of iconic Canadian rock artists, no one can explain, but it keeps happening. Uh, but I thought I should cover the poem in isolation as well because it's just wonderful. It's a great poem. I really like it. I hope you enjoy it too. Goodbye.